Hello and welcome to the SciPhi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave again.
And I'm Martijn, still.
And tonight, obviously, Martijn's back. He hasn't been on a stream with us for ages, have you, Martijn?
Christmas one was the last one, I guess, so it's 2 months.
Oh, yeah. No, I was so drunk I forgot you were there.
That happens to me all the time.
But, yeah. So, how have you been, man? What have you been up to?
I've had a burnout and all kinds of stuff, and so that basically.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's been well. To be honest, it's actually one of the better things when you look at the politics side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it meant that I got like a fast track to a psychologist and all kinds of help like that. So it's a rare thing to actually see social policy work.
Yeah, it sounds it. But so is everything going well other than that? Is that going well?
These days it's apart from the existential dread this morning. Yeah.
Awesome.
If you're not suffering from existential dread, are you even alive?
Shut up, Socrates.
So tonight we're doing a stream that seems quite poignant.
Yeah, I couldn't have timed it better, really, could I?
No, I mean it was last week you were basically suggesting, oh, should we do one on just war theory? And I was like, oh yeah, maybe, go on. And you put the slides together and you'd pretty much finished them yesterday. You let us know and war broke out.
I am Nostradamus. Except with an easier name to pronounce.
Yeah. Which, well, that's basically tonight's topic. It's war, just war theory, the philosophy of war. And Martijn had some things to say as well. So Dave's obviously going to be doing his slideshow first, and then any sort of any questions or points that aren't relevant to the slides at the time will be taken at the end. But anything relevant to anything Dave says in the slides we'll deal with at the time. Now, I do need to briefly put things into Be Right Back, and I am sure that it is going to mess things up when I go there, and I'm going to have to sort things out again. But hopefully it won't take as long as that one just did. But if you guys can just wait whilst Dave sets up the screens, and we will be right back.
I'm a busy man. I don't have time to wait. Yeah, ready to start?
As ready as we'll be tonight, Dave.
Okay, so as the title screen says, it's a stream about the philosophy of war. Okay, and so the philosophy of war, it covers loads of topics within war itself. It covers the types of stances you can take to war, the morality of war itself, how combatants and non-combatants are supposed to be treated during war, whether wars could be just or whether morality has nothing to do with war, whether it's right to target civilians, that kind of stuff. It mostly deals with morality and ethics surrounding war.
Makes sense to me.
And so the first stance is pacifism. This is the idea that we can discuss war in terms of morality, but all wars are immoral. There isn't any way that a war can be moral. It's the promotion of nonviolence, and you could basically call it anti-warism. But the idea is that, there just is no morally justifiable reasons for war. And there's several types of pacifism, and I'll discuss one of them later. But generally, the idea is just that there's no moral justifications for war.
So even in defense, Dave, would a pacifist say even in defense that there is no...
Even in defense.
Right, that's interesting. You're not justified in defending yourself or anyone else.
No, because it's murder and killing, and there's no way to make sure that non-combatants can be protected and that kind of thing. George Orwell once said that pacifism is the doorway to fascism. Not because the pacifists are fascists, but because it's immoral for you to fight back, so you just roll over and surrender, and therefore fascists can walk in the door quite easily.
Mm.
Yeah, the next slide contains a scene of torture. So if you're a bit squeamish about that kind of thing, you might want to look away. I know most people probably aren't, and it's taken from the Abu Ghraib incident. So most people have seen it, but if you don't want to see it, look away until I say I'm moving on to the next slide.
I object to the term incident, though.
Oh, yeah, it was more than an incident, but, Okay, so this speaks of realism to do with war. And it's not used in terms of realism and anti-realism, like in morality and stuff like that. What it means is that we have to be realistic about war, in that we can't apply terms of morality to it, because there just is no way. Like they say, war is hell. And if you think that morality and war have some kind of connections, and that our actions in war can be dictated by morality, then you're actually causing harm to the soldiers and to the war effort, and it's dangerous to soldiers and those trying to protect themselves and win the war. And one of the reasons I chose this image is because when most people see this image, they think there's something wrong with it, and justifiably so. But if war realism is correct, then there should be nothing wrong with that image. Yeah?
Yeah, that's interesting. Although, could an excuse to that be that, just because we have an emotional reaction to it, then that's not actually relevant to war itself, so we see it as wrong? I mean, I genuinely think it's wrong, but I'm trying to understand this perspective a little bit more.
The realist perspective would just be that there is nothing wrong with this because it's war, and you have to do whatever it takes to win that war. This guy was involved with insurgents. They needed to find out where those insurgents were. It turned out that he wasn't actually anything to do with the insurgents, but, casualties of war and all that. So according to the realists, there just is nothing wrong with this. It's sort of, but it seems to me that you have something of a ticking time bomb situation going on here.
Mm.
Torture is wrong. In the case of this, it seems to be that there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of quotes from the chat. Kimo says, "Putting cart before the horse seems unwise," which was in reference to just a little bit earlier. And Sean Carroll says, "I would further state, Dave, that collateral damage in saying bombing a target is unavoidable. We need to choose the target more carefully to minimize it."
I agree with that, and I'll be discussing something like that later on.
Yep.
So another thing I would say about war realism is there's a lot of people, say, in the country where, say, the soldiers of that side will look and see and say, well, our soldiers are just doing whatever it takes to protect our thing. We can't apply morality to them. But at the same time, if the enemy soldier came to them and committed horrific acts against their family as part of the war, would they still say morality doesn't apply to what the enemy soldier did?
Probably not.
No, exactly. It seems to be our soldiers can do what we like. Your soldiers have to obey the rules of combat.
Serious double
And,
standard.
Yeah, and terrorism and things like that. There would be nothing wrong with terrorism in a warlike situation if morality and justice didn't apply to war.
So it would seem then that, the way we feel about realism in war is that it's false.
I would. And I think wars can be fought justly and morally, and I think that's how they should be fought.
If they had to be fought.
If they have to be fought, yeah. And the just war tradition gives an account of when it's reasonable to go to war, when it's just to go to war. Okay, so just war theorists believe that, yes, we can talk about war in terms of morality and justice. And not only can we, but we should. It's kind of essential to the discourse that surrounds war, because it's only by applying justice and morality that we can understand which wars are just and which are unjust. Like if you think of the one in the Ukraine now, you probably think it's unjust. Like, I'm not making a case one way or the other, but most people will think this one is unjust. Whereas when you think about fighting against Nazi Germany, you think of a just war. Or say the American Civil War. I know it wasn't all about freeing the slaves, but there was a big portion of that. And so you might think that part of the war is a just war. So, yeah. So those are the three stances you can kind of take. And the way to kind of figure it out is, if you think morality applies to war, then you're either a just theorist or a pacifist. If you think all wars are unjust, you're a pacifist. If you think that wars can be just, then you're a just theorist, obviously. And if you think morality doesn't apply, then you're a realist about war.
Yeah, I mean, I think pacifism is an ideal that is probably unattainable. I think that from the description so far, I think it's what we would like to have, right? It's our nice to have situation that there is no war because everybody realizes it's immoral and so on and so forth. But I think in the situations where someone needs defending, or you need to defend yourself, then you're probably just to do so, as long as you do it in accordance to certain rules. I mean, if someone does the equivalent of stealing a load of sheep off of you, and you nuke them, that's not an apt response. Obviously,
well, this is one thing. Sorry, my thing paused for a big moment there, and I kind of cut out.
All right.
Like I lost some of what you were saying. But Rousseau sort of argues about this when it comes to having a nation of true Christians, in that most Christians are pacifists, or ideally supposed to be pacifists. So in that kind of nation, it would be good. Everybody should be a pacifist. Everybody should be judging the best of other people. And that makes it very easy for a tyrant to take control. And the same would be the case in, like, pacifism. If you had a nation of pacifists, all it would take is for one tyrant to come steamrolling over everybody and seize power. So it really only works, like you say, if everybody is a pacifist. And not just everybody in your nation, but everybody in the world. It like you say, it's an ideal.
Yep. It sounds like the way it should be, but not the way it is.
I agree. All it takes is one Putin, and that's it. Okay, so there's a couple of different types of realism, and that's descriptive realism is the first one. And this is the idea that soldiers in war can't actually make any real meaningful decisions because they have orders handed down to them, and on the front line, it's basically kill or be killed. Those are basically your choices. You try to stay alive. You want to get through the war. You want to come back home to your family. And that means you can't make any real meaningful moral decisions in the heat of the moment. And if ought implies can, and you cannot do those things, then it seems that morality doesn't apply when all your choices are kill or be killed. It seems reasonable enough, but when you think about some of the things that happened during Vietnam, and even some of the things that happened in Iraq, like the gang rape of children, the destruction of entire villages, torture, things like that, it seems that in those circumstances, meaningful choices could have been made because they weren't put into a position where they had to do those things. They chose to do those things.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, the psychological trauma would have affected the kind of decisions that they were making.
That's exactly my point. Yeah.
Yeah. But they aren't forced into that situation except by conscription or by volunteering to be there. But there's no order being handed to them that says that they must do these things. So they can. There is a sort of choice that can be made there outside of the order.
So Sean actually says something related to this. He says, it's not the soldiers who are responsible for bad events, it's the leadership. Bad leadership is very lethal. But what you're saying there, Dave, is, yeah, you know what? They're not necessarily responsible for most of the bad events, but some of them, they've chosen to do these bad things where there was probably an alternative method they could have done.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think of some of the people during the Nuremberg trial, they might have been caught up in the moment, but there were choices that they made. Like, you can't say Mengele was somebody who wasn't happy doing what he was doing, and he wasn't ordered to do it. He was one of the ones that put the program in place and chose to do it.
Right, yeah.
So the soldiers under him might be slightly different, but in that case, he made a choice.
Yeah, that's fair. Kimmo also says, oh, damn you with my long words with my dyslexia.
Anachronistically.
Yeah, so can we say anachronistically that soldiery is frequently one Milgram experiment?
I think to some extent, yes, it probably could be because it's about following orders and how much an authority can get away with before there's any pushback. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Michael J. Fox film Casualties of War.
No, I don't think so.
That was about a situation like this where he gets sent out in Vietnam with Sean Penn and some other soldiers, and they gang rape an 11-year-old girl, and he tries to tell, and they try to push it under the rug, and he keeps pushing back and pushing back. And it shows that, the higher-ups are like, yes, okay, this happened, but we excuse it. It's war.
Oh, Kimmo's saying that he's having problems with audio. It looks like it's outputting from my end, and I can hear them too. Kimmo, hopefully your audio comes back. Maybe refresh. I'll have to tap that. Try refreshing, Kimmo.
Yeah, it seems to be coming through at my end.
Okay.
Like the YouTube.
Yeah, and Jeff's. Oh no, that's what I said. Jeff says, as we're talking philosophy of war, are you guys going to talk about Sun Tzu? And I don't think that's really going to come up tonight, is it, Jeff? I mean, it can come up in the future, but not tonight. Tonight's mainly around just war theory, rather than art of war.
Yeah, that's it. It's a different type of philosophy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just removing spammers.
Ah, thank you. To be fair, you're doing the presentation tonight. I should probably do that.
No, don't worry.
You on it?
Yeah. Okay, so another form of realism is the idea of prescriptive realism, which is the idea that even if we can make these meaningful choices in war, we shouldn't. We should actually prescribe that there is no morals, that there is no such thing as justice. It's about winning the war. And if we have no actual kind of moral oughts that we have to obey, then think of how a war might be more brutal, but it would be over sooner. Hence the image of the bombing of Hiroshima there.
Yeah.
That's a very optimistic approach.
It is, isn't it? It really is.
I'll just end up in Fallout World.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. In something like that, if there is no such thing as justice or anything like that, then it's okay to just nuke somebody immediately. Like, you're attacking me? Okay, all your citizens are gone. But then those allies can do the same to you, and, we have full-scale nuclear war.
And now I've got the theme tune, the bongo 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 tune from Fallout 4 stuck in my head. Fallout 3. That's going to be going around my head for the rest of this stream. So I apologize if I start.
That's the most racist song you will ever hear.
Yeah. Oh, God. So apologies if I'm even more distracted than usual.
I mean, it's not a very interesting subject. It's just kind of apt at the moment. No, I actually kind of love the topic of just war and stuff. Like Martaine's read Walter's book, Just and Unjust Wars, and it's actually like a really fascinating read.
It is. It's the only philosophy book I ever bought twice, because literally my dog ate my homework.
Okay, so there's several different types of pacifism, but there's an interesting one called contingent pacifism. And this is the idea that pacifism is contingent on how the war is actually fought. So could there be ways that we could fight a war that could be considered just? I mean, if the idea is that civilians and the non-combatants being injured in collateral damage and things like that are what make the war unjust, if we figure out a way to wage war without any of that happening, then is it okay? And I mean, you had Bertrand Russell, who was a well-known pacifist, who objected to World War I, like quite severely objected to World War I. But in World War II, he said, no, this is a war that must be fought.
Yeah, no, this is me, man.
Okay.
Yeah, this is me. And I mean, I think we shouldn't wage war until we can be sure that the price is low enough,
Yeah, and the gains are necessary.
Yeah.
Like, not fighting back against the Nazis would have led to a far worse world than we know now. And
I mean, this sounds closer to just war, though, than pacifism in itself.
sort of, but in this, it's the only time it's okay to fight. Imagine if we had a bunch of robots in the desert, like a bunch of robots from each country that are fighting this war. The robots go with each other. The only harm.
Cool.
It'd be cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I
Or
want
like naval. Yeah, or like naval war. Out to sea, there could be no civilians harmed. So if wars are all fought navally, then perhaps, that overcomes this objection by pacifism. But if your objection is also the fact that people get killed, then that kind of doesn't overcome the problem of pacifism.
Just out of curiosity, these robots fighting in the desert, would they be narrated by Craig Charles?
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, probably. Or Picard.
Oh, that would be awesome. That would actually be awesome. I mean,
or Samuel L. Jackson.
Motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is types of pacifism that seem like it's not completely anti-war, but most types of pacifism are just completely anti-war.
Yeah, that's fair. There's a few comments in the chat. Sean mentions that Operation Downfall was an interesting dilemma. We could launch an invasion that was possibly too costly or bring swift end to Japan's hostilities. And I don't think people liked either option. Lone Wolf mentions that he says, I suppose, are you asking if cyber war could be a form of just war, or asking if we could get by creating a policy based on the results of a virtual war? That's also an interesting thought to think about. So rather than it being, like we were talking about earlier with the robots in the desert, it's all done virtually. No one actually dies, but once you're dead in this virtual world, you're out. Everybody's hooked into VR. It's the world's best gaming system ever, but you might lose your country if you don't do well enough.
Giant paintball war.
But yeah, no, the rest of them are not necessarily relevant to right now, and can probably be brought up at the end of the slideshow.
Okay, no worries. Whenever. Okay, so now we have the just war tradition. This is slightly different to the idea of just war theory. They might sound related, and they kind of are, but they're not one and the same thing. The just war tradition was kind of created by Augustine. And it's this idea that we can fight a just war. And he based that off, ideas promoted by the Bible, promoted by Jesus, based on Christian theology. But he saw that there might be a need to actually fight a war because pacifism, even though Christianity promotes it, it isn't necessarily good for a nation, especially if they're being attacked by another nation. And there's 6 jus ad bellum, which means, justice in war, justice before war, basically. And then there's 2 jus in bello, sorry. And that is justice during war. Ooh, we got a new subscriber.
Yes.
Yeah, nice one.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I was just saying thank you in the chat.
No, it's all good. Okay, and these are... Hang on, I've got notes for this one because there's quite a lot to it. Okay, so the 6 jus ad bellum. The first one is, and these must all be met before going to war. This is how you would decide whether or not your cause is just. So it has to be a legitimate authority, like a king, a president, a parliament, that kind of thing. They decide on the entrance to war. So, it's an actual thing promoted by the state rather than just, say, a rebel army going to war.
Wait. So I would say it would be like the sovereign, right?
Yeah, the sovereign.
But in case of a rebel army holding a piece of land, right? They are basically, in that sense, sovereign over that part of the land, right? So would that be a valid authority, or would that not be a valid authority, or would that then depend on the people who live in said territory?
Yeah, it would depend on how that nation functions. So if you think about the states, there's an overall leader, but most states are supposed to be self-sovereign, but also have this federal level kind of idea. But if you think of something like Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge,
Mm-hmm.
the Khmer Rouge had no actual sovereign authority, so they were just these bunch of rebels trying to take over the country from within. So their war was not just because it was just people trying to overthrow a government. Although in certain circumstances, it could be just to go to war.
So would the leadership of ISIS have been a valid authority when they were sort of a country?
Once they became a country, yes. But before that, they weren't. And they also didn't fit some of the other kind of stipulations for just war tradition.
Yeah, so that's where the problem sneaks in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just so that we have note of that.
Yeah. No, it's one of those complicated things. But if you think about when these were originally written, there was nothing like that, really. Most countries were, or most nation states were headed by some kind of sovereign.
Well, not really. I mean, the Gauls were different tribes, which were still sovereign over their lands, basically.
Over the lands, yeah. But they could declare going to war on another tribe.
Yeah, of course.
But, like in, say, Britain or, say, France overall, they had a sovereign or a parliament, and they would be the ones that would decide whether or not it was right to go to war.
Yeah.
Okay, and a second kind of stipulation is that the cause for entering war must be a just one, like a defense against an aggressor, to overthrow a tyrant, to free a bunch of enslaved people, that kind of thing.
So does that mean only one side can actually be fighting a just war?
I'll be coming to that later. Because there is questions about that, whether it's possible for one side to actually fight in a just war if their cause is unjust. So, say, none of the Nazi soldiers could have been fighting justly because they were fighting for an unjust cause in an unjust nation.
Okay.
And the third stipulation, and this one has some kind of criticisms of it. And it's the idea that once we go into war, it must be pursued with the right intention, like for the purposes of a just cause. Now, you have the Americans who talk, or everybody talks about America in the Middle East and fighting for oil. But their claim was that they intended to go in and overthrow an oppressive government. So that was their intention, and the gaining of the oil fields and the poppy fields was a side effect. But how can you actually decide which of those was their true intention? Like, even if they declare that their intention was to overthrow this unjust government, does that make it their intention? So there is some kind of criticism about this thing.
Yeah.
Also, we can always debate whether or not it's just to overthrow an unjust government. I mean,
yeah. Like, if the people are happy with that government, it's just the other side thinks that what's happening to them is unjust. Is it just to go in and overthrow them? So, yeah, there is criticisms that are made and can be made about this stipulation.
In fact, Jeff has just asked a similar question. I'm going to read it out, but I think you're going to come to it later. And he says, can I ask something about the just war theory? Does this feed into that old adage that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, depending on perspective? And that's basically what you said you're going to come to later.
Yeah. And it can be seen in that manner. But I'll come to it a bit later and kind of expand on it a little bit more.
Yeah, cool. I hope you don't mind waiting, Jeff.
I'm sorry, Jeff. So the fourth condition is that the war itself fulfills a condition of proportionality. That means, like, the war is proportional to the effect it's going to have and to what's happened to you. Like, say the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, so America just went straight in there with nuclear bombs. That doesn't seem to be a proportional response to what happened to them, or a proportional response to getting them to stop fighting. The war, fifth condition, the war also has to fulfill the condition of having prosperity.
Oh, you cut out there.
So in other words,
fill the condition of what, Dave?
It must be having the prospect of success.
Right.
At least a reasonable chance for you to win the war. So you're not doing Blackadder goes forth and into. Can you hear me?
Not sure with your connection seems to be fucked, man.
Yeah, you are bubbling a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. It's been fine for the last few streams.
It's me.
Yeah.
Actually, Dave, did you come on after Martin today?
Yeah.
You had a little thought last week that the last person in has connection issues.
Yeah, that's how it seemed to be with Emerson, didn't it?
Yeah, because you were fine that stream and he was having a couple of problems.
Yeah, it's weird.
But you seem better now.
Okay. So, yeah, there has to be a reasonable chance of you successfully winning this war. You can't just send your soldiers out to die, kind of like the British generals in World War I, where it's just run at those machine guns. If there's enough of you, they'll run out of bullets before before people get there. So you send enough soldier, add enough bullets, eventually one of you is going to run out. So you can't do things like that for the war to be just.
Quick side note, this has always been also Ben Carson's solution to having a mass shooter in the room. Just so you know.
It is, yeah.
Do not trust him in anything other than brain surgery, which is a weird thing to say in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, you don't necessarily need a brain to do brain surgery. You just need to practice and have muscle memory.
So it appears.
Okay, and so the final jus ad bellum condition is that the war is a last resort. In other words, you can't just go straight to war. You have to try all kinds of peace processes, negotiations, diplomacy, and all that. And once all that's run out, if there is absolutely no other choice, then you can go to war. So if all these conditions are met, then you can say that you are fighting a just war. And all these seem pretty reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm.
You should still read the last sentence on the slide, though, man. That's the most important part.
Oh, the exit strategy. That's not in my notes.
Oh.
I meant the other one, though. These conditions have been encoded into the
Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention, yeah.
Making them international law and therefore only transgressible by America, because of course the Yanks have what's called the Hague. God damn it, what's it called? The Hague Invasion Act, which says that if you have an American prisoner anywhere on the world, that the U.S. reserves the right to invade your country and extract that person.
They're just bullies.
Well, no, it's important to say that America doesn't have to keep to international law of war and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it is this actual, because of this actual tradition that they've been written in, you know, these are things that are considered to be what makes a war just. And if you break them, then obviously you're not fighting a just war, and war crimes can be brought about in The Hague. And so there's now jus in bello, which is, you know, justice during war. So there's a couple of conditions that have to be met during the war in order for the war to be just as well. The condition of proportionality must be fulfilled. So, you know, you can't bomb somebody into the Stone Age, as some people say, because that's not proportional. It's not proportional to wipe out an entire country because you've been attacked.
Unless your country has also been wiped out, in which case, go ahead.
Yeah. And the second principle is the principle of non-combatant immunity. So in other words, you have to be able to distinguish between a combatant and a non-combatant, and between a legitimate and illegitimate human target for direct attack in order for it to be just. And you have to only intentionally target the combatants.
And this is why the US lost in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it really, guerrilla warfare really does kind of change this. Because how do you distinguish between a combatant and a non-combatant in a situation where everybody's just wearing regular street clothes? Like in the army, lots of people are told to shoot only those in uniform. So how does that work with the guerrilla resistance force?
Yeah, exactly. And this is what my point was going to be when you brought up Vietnam earlier, because this is also what happens when you first encounter it and decide to no longer discriminate against people who are combatants and who are not combatants, because the combatants are literally everywhere amongst the non-combatants, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So that one can be kind of hard to fulfill. But again, I suppose you could say, if you can make that distinction, you must make that distinction for that to be a just war. Yeah,
but in saying that, you are saying that sometimes you don't have to make that distinction, and that's where
there are arguments for that. Yeah, there are arguments for that, because of the whole right to self-defense and that kind of thing. So if it looks like you're about to be attacked, I mean, it could just be somebody running up to you for help, but...
Yeah, I just say everybody who's carrying a weapon is fair game, but that's me, and that would probably go too far as well.
Yeah, because you could have somebody who is considered a traitor to the cause, who is keeping a weapon to stop himself from being killed by the local army or local guerrilla army, and then end up getting shot. Yeah.
It's a hard question, man.
It is. It's like a really difficult moral question.
That's the book.
That's the book, yeah. This is an excellent book. If you want to read up on just and unjust wars, this is considered a seminal work. There are several that have come out since then, like Jeff McMahon's Killing in War, Oren's, I can't remember his first name, Stephen. I've got it written in this somewhere. He's written The Ethics of War, or The Ethics of Killing in War. And he's got lots of criticisms. Anthony Cody has a lot of criticisms for Alter's work, but this kind of turned the whole just war theory game around. And so, like I said earlier, people might assume that just war tradition and just war theory are one and the same thing, but they're actually two different things. Just war theory has been built on top of just war tradition, but it goes deeper into it. It goes into discussions like the justifiability of war, whether war can be justified at all, the morality of killing in war. When is it moral? Is it ever immoral? Can we even talk about it being moral? Who is a combatant? Who is a non-combatant? Can we target civilians at any time? Just war theory is about questions like that.
Yeah, exactly. And the book also, it has just great examples and great thought experiments as well.
Yeah. And it's actually quite detached from some of the things it brings up. Like, it talks about Nazis, and it actually has some praise for certain, like Rommel, who was ordered to kill any troop that he sees. Rommel wrote a letter back and said, no, I will continue to follow the just war, and, you know, we won't kill unarmed people. We won't do things like that, even though I suppose in his home country, they just weren't caring about that. I think it was called the Commando Order, something like that. It's been a while since I've read it, yeah.
So Jeff's actually got a question. He says, without giving my own opinions on the term and how it's been used in the past, what do you guys think about the concept of humanitarian intervention?
I think it can be a good thing, and I think it can be part of the reason for going to war in a just manner, so long as it's carried out, and depending on what they're intervening in.
What about you, Martin?
No, I think it has never been used in a decent way in the past, and I am very skeptical as to whether it will ever be used properly in the future. So, no, I don't think no.
Yeah. See, I think going into Rwanda and helping out there would have been a good humanitarian intervention, even though we didn't do it, and we should have.
Yeah, but that would be more of a thing like cleaning up your own mess than being a humanitarian intervention.
Yeah, but again, it still would be a humanitarian effort because it's about saving lives and, you know, making sure that the slaughter doesn't happen and that kind of thing.
Of course. But it's still, yeah. The thing is, I don't think you get to use the term humanitarian intervention when you fuck things up in the first place.
Yeah, I don't hold it to that stringent of a thing. I mean, it's still cleaning up your own mess, but at least you're getting around to doing the right thing.
Feels like it feels like charity to me, right? When you're going in to fix your own shit, you're not doing charity. You're doing the least possible.
Yeah, I guess, but I'm okay with the term humanitarian intervention. Okay, so another big part of just war theory is the idea of the moral equality of combatants. There are some who just don't concern themselves with this. But Michael Walzer actually spends a lot of time focusing on this. And he thinks that soldiers have moral equivalency. You know, even if you're fighting on an unjust side, you're in that war, you have the right to defend yourself against those who might be fighting on the just side, say. Let me read out his quote. Combatants on both sides of a war, regardless of the justice of their cause, are equally permitted to kill each other and liable to be killed. And here, liable just means that it's morally permissible for them to be killed. So if two soldiers meet on the battlefield, one side has the right to kill the other side has the right to kill the other.
Yeah, I agree, but
yeah, Jeff McMahon makes an interesting distinction here, and he says that the two sides aren't morally equivalent. So any soldier fighting on an unjust side can never be fighting in a just manner, because he has no right to actually be there and to be attacking those people. They are already on immoral grounds. So simply just the fact that they're attacking somebody gives the other person the right to self-defense, so the other soldier. But the other soldier firing back and fighting back, that doesn't necessarily give the other person the right to self-defense. Because if you consider, say you're getting mugged, somebody points a gun at you, you grab the gun. I know it's like kind of mad, you know, like dream world, but you grab the gun and you shoot him in the leg, and he grabs the gun back. You shooting at him doesn't necessarily, or, you know, say he pulls out a knife. You shooting at him doesn't necessarily give him the right to defend himself, because he shouldn't have been trying to mug you in the first place.
Yeah, but then he's still the initial aggressor, isn't he?
Yeah, but that's the point.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it doesn't make it morally permissible for him to claim self-defense for why he killed you, because he shouldn't have been attacking you in the first place.
Oh, no, completely agreed.
Yeah, and so Jeff McMahon kind of saw war in that same way. So when the Nazis invaded somewhere, and those troops fought back, then they were fighting a just cause. But the fact that they fought back doesn't mean the Nazis kind of got off on a self-defense claim, because those resistors were shooting back.
Yeah.
So they're still immoral.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm in
agreement.
Yeah.
This has become quite a kind of popular and powerful critique of Walzer's argument that, you know, there is a moral equality to combatants. So he argues that there's two things that we need to distinguish between: material non-innocence and moral non-innocence. A person is materially non-innocent if he's threatening somebody else. So the Nazi soldier shooting back at the soldier that had shot at him, the soldier that shot at the Nazi is materially non-innocent, because, you know, he is guilty of firing at that Nazi and trying to kill him. But the Nazi would be morally non-innocent, because he shouldn't have been attacking in the first place, whereas the Allied soldier would have been morally innocent because he was just defending himself.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's right.
Sean made a comment about from earlier. about some cultural bias. He says that there's some cultural bias to the treatment of enemy combatants. For example, the Japanese found surrender distasteful.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there was a lot of the like beheading stuff going on in Japan. And in the West, we found it kind of repugnant, but in Japan, they thought that they were giving them a noble death.
Yeah, doing it with honor.
Yeah. So yeah, there is cultural bias.
Yeah, which can actually be hard to tally up. I suppose what you could say in that regard would be, if a country believes that it is more, it's noble to be beheaded, then that's what you do for them, but they should respect you.
That it's not for you,
Yeah. So both countries would be doing something that they didn't like, but it's respecting the other country at the same time.
No, I think in that case you should just extradite them, man. That's even a lot better. I wouldn't go and behead a Japanese guy simply because he surrendered to me. I just send him back with a note and say like, "Hey, this dude surrendered. I mean, you're free to chop his head off. Go ahead, if you want, actually. So go ahead, do that."
In that circumstance, they'd probably fall on their own sword, wouldn't they?
Yeah, quite literally. I think that's a cultural practice.
No, it is. That's why I said
Unitary.
Yeah. So yeah.
But I mean, for a just war, if you kind of capture somebody, is he still a combatant if you've stripped him of his weapon and you've locked him in a jail?
No, he was a combatant.
He was a combatant.
Depends on how much value you attach to somebody taking an oath.
Sorry.
Right?
That's.
Well, I think that depends on the value you attach to people taking an oath. If my understanding is that when you join the military, you have to do some kind of an oath.
Yeah, you give up your right to not be killed.
Oh yeah, those kinds of things. Yeah. So if you're gonna say like, well, this guy took the oath, he's still under the oath, so I guess he's still a combatant.
If he can't fight back and he's locked up, then I'm not sure he could be considered a combatant.
I don't really know, but probably legally, yes. I'm thinking.
Yeah. Like Sean Carroll has just posted, The Great Escape would say the prisoner is a combatant because they have a moral duty to escape. But if they're trying to escape, then you could consider them a combatant, say. But if they're just locked up and they're not doing anything, they're being like non-resistant, do they become a non-combatant and therefore cannot be specifically targeted for death? If that's the case, then kind of mistreatment is immoral in a camp.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going toward death penalty shit. Oh, right. Yeah.
No. But that's kind of what happens in prisoner or war camps. It's kind of outlawed now, but it's what used to happen.
Yeah.
And see, this is one thing in the Islamic just war tradition. I know they don't quite follow it now, but if you look in the Quran, it says that captured soldiers must be treated respectfully. They must be fed. They can also be taken and sold off as slaves, which kind of goes against that. But if they refuse to continue fighting or they surrender, then they're supposed to actually either be taken and treated well or taken back to the border and set free. If I remember the actual just war tradition from the Quran correctly.
Sounds like it could be it, yeah.
I don't know enough about it to contest either way or confirm.
Yeah, it was like 10 years ago I read about this stuff, so Robert Nozick, who you'll recognize from like the Free Rider Thought Experiment and the experience machine thought experiment. He came up with a thought experiment to help distinguish between material non-innocence and moral non-innocence a little better. And it was called The Falling Man, and it's quite a famous thought experiment now, sort of like, the free rider and the experience machine. So Nozick's thought experiment is, if someone picks up a third party and throws them at you while you're down the bottom of a deep well, the third party is innocent and also a threat. Had he chosen to launch himself at you, they would be an aggressor. Even though the falling person would survive his fall onto you, can you use your ray gun to disintegrate the falling body before it crushes and kills you?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a real tough one. I mean, it's wired into us in general to survive. You're saying that this person would definitely survive. How injured would they be, or do we not know this?
It doesn't give that information. That's the literal thought experiment there.
Okay. Makes it a little bit harder. Like if they were going to survive, but there'd just be a head in a jar, then I'd say there isn't much quality of life there. So it's definitely me. I think what you're supposed to say in this circumstance is you should try and catch them, and if you can't catch them, then maybe you should, it's not their fault. So
the idea is that you will die. Even if you try to catch them, the impact is so hard, you'll break his fall, but he'll break your neck or back or whatever.
Well, I guess brace for impact then.
Well, this is the idea. I mean, materially, he's non-innocent because he is going to harm you. But he had no intent to harm you.
So morally, he's not.
He's innocent, yeah.
Yeah, so basically these are the people where the guerrilla fighters are hiding amongst.
Yeah, basically.
That's why it's brace for impact.
Yeah. And this sort of applies to the idea that McMahon is making, where is it okay for that soldier, the enemy soldier, to kill those on the just side of a war simply because they're a threat to him? Is it morally permissible for them to do it?
No.
Simply because they're a threat? Yeah, exactly.
A flip side, though, what if those soldiers had a gun to their head, and if you don't attack these people, I'll kill you, which obviously does happen in
then still. I mean, we are oftentimes a little bit too comfortable with people having ranks that are above ours, while those ranks also have some responsibilities that come with them. One of the things is that I think that we can expect more when it comes to mercy and related things, right, from a soldier than we could from any regular Joe. Hey, Joe.
Where are you going with that gun in your hand?
To shoot sheriffs.
Also, for instance, that's one of the things that's been going on with the COVID, that we can also expect police officers to suffer a barrage of all kinds of garbage without them pulling a gun or, hitting someone in the face. I think sometimes restraint comes with the job. And I think that has to go for soldiers, nurses, and police officers, especially.
Yeah. And I mean, Sean Carroll makes a good point, and I was just going to make that. There's soldiers in certain armies, and especially if you think back to like World War II, World War I, you did have a gun to your head because if you deserted, you didn't do your job, you could be killed by the officers. You had a gun to your head by the superiors.
Yep.
Yeah, so you have no other choice well, you're going to get shot at by one person or another.
Yeah.
Even in those cases, right? Even in those cases, a soldier is one who has already forfeited their life in that sense.
Yeah.
Well, not so much their life, but like you said in the beginning, they're right not to be killed. They forfeited.
Yeah.
Unless they've been forced into it. Some are forced into it from the start, aren't they? They're
Conscription, draft. Yeah.
Conscripts we should treat as morally innocent, at least, I think.
Well, there's a couple of arguments here as well. There's an epistemic argument. So a soldier.
Right back.
Yeah. Do you want me to wait?
No. I'm turning you up.
Okay. Yeah. So there's an argument here to be made from an epistemic ground. So a soldier is taken out and sent away. He's shoved into war by his superiors, and he's told who to fire at. Now, he might not be privy to information that the higher-ups have, so he may think that he's fighting a just war. Like Jeff mentioned earlier, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Mm-hmm.
So he could be filled with the ideas that this other army are terrorists, and he's the freedom fighter. So as far as he's aware, he is the morally just one, even though the actual case is that he is the unjust one fighting in the unjust war.
Mm.
So does that then change the moral equivalency of the combatants?
I'd say it does a little bit, but not completely. I mean, it's his intent, and his intent has changed, and I think morality, a big part of morality, is your intent. So if your intent is to do the good thing, and which just so happens to be fighting this war, then you are at least somewhat more morally innocent. And if there's no way you can find out the truth, I mean, in today's technology, you should be able to actually find out what's really going on. But well, let's just say you're in a circumstance where you can't, for whatever reason.
North Korea.
Yes, yeah, exactly. In that sort of circumstance, you're as innocent as you can be. You're doing what you've been told is right, and all you can actually verify is right, because they're the only sources you get. It's kind of like the whole rationality conversation that we had, where if someone was stuck in a commune and the only access to information they were given was, their Bibles and things from religious leaders, and these fake science textbooks that were all young Earth creationist based, they would be rational in believing in young Earth creationism, because that's all the information, and they've applied their thinking to it, and that's all they know of. They'd be wrong, obviously, but they wouldn't have any way of knowing that they're wrong. And I think the same can be said for this. They would think they're doing the right thing. They could have justified that they're doing the right thing. They'd be wrong. So there is still a bit of an imbalance, but they don't know that they're wrong. So
yeah, it makes it kind of difficult, doesn't it? Because as far as they're concerned, their only intent is to defend themselves against somebody who they've been told is unjust.
Mm-hmm.
You watch Black Mirror, don't you?
Oh yeah.
There's an interesting one in there where it's soldiers going out to fight bugs. And it turns out that they've had the implant put in their head.
Yeah, and it's
actually, they're just humans. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a situation like that, it sort of resembles this kind of situation. They don't know that the other side is innocent or fighting justly. They just think that they're being invaded by an alien species. So McMahon would argue something like you just argued, that in this day and age, there are ways to find out whether or not you are on the just side, unless there is some kind of total news blackout wherever you are or wherever your country is. And the only way you can get information is through your superiors. But you could actually go out and research. So you should be trying to make sure that you're on the just side. It's difficult, I know.
Especially because I'm not sure if that's a thing with you here, but what I've heard is that things like political expression in our army are prohibited.
And yeah.
So
you're there to follow orders, and that's it.
Yeah, but even amongst soldiers, right? So the soldiers, right, and now in the Dutch bases now, can't even discuss what's happening in Ukraine. The political dimensions of it.
I'm not sure if that's still the case in the UK, but when I was younger, I had friends in the army, and that was the case then as well.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't even have a discussion. When they were sent to Bosnia, they couldn't even discuss the actual politics of it, just the tactics of it.
Yeah, and I would say that that's its own form of evil, first of all.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and then a second, that makes it fairly hard for combatants to actually decide whether or not they're on the right side. It's not impossible, certainly not, but very hard.
Yeah, but McMahon says the ability is there, so that epistemic argument isn't necessarily a good counter, though it is one to consider. And the other one is another one that you just mentioned, that regardless of whether or not he knows that he's on the unjust side or the just side, the fact is that he is on the unjust side, so it makes no actual difference to the morality.
Yeah.
I think it does make a difference to the morality, but not on the material side.
Yeah. So that's one way of thinking about moral equivalency.
Sean Carroll's got a fictional universe question. Do you want it now or at the end?
I'm just looking at it now. A force drops a large object on a city from orbit. Is their choice considered just in their eyes? I would probably say that yes, it probably would be, depending on the circumstances, but I'm not sure that just it being just in their eyes makes it just.
Yeah. Descriptively, they might think it is.
Yeah.
I have no idea what this question is about, so I'm going to refrain from answering.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know the series.
I don't see a choice.
Yeah. I suppose they meant their choice to retaliate? I don't know.
The choice to drop the actual object on a city from orbit.
What is it, Sean? What's the series? Right? Oh, Mobile Suit Gundam. I've not watched it.
Yeah, no, I've never seen it
like
either,
a
unfortunately.
Gundam Wing type thing.
So I'd say, like, if the city chooses to incinerate the object, then yeah, sure, that would be a just choice, I guess. The choice to drop the object on a city, I mean, that only seems right when it's proportional to what has already happened. Also, there's still a lot of innocent life, so let's just not do it.
Yeah, and like I say, just because it's just in their eyes doesn't necessarily make it so, because they would be targeting non-combatants and therefore not fulfilling the criteria for what it means to attack justly.
Yeah.
Which moves... Sorry?
No, you go first.
I was going to say, it moves us on nicely to the actual next topic.
Oh, cool. I was going to say we covered it.
Yeah. But it follows on to another point, and one that you'll be familiar with. So, like it says, one standard featured in the just war tradition is that a just war can only be fought if you can distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. Enemy combatants can be killed intentionally, but non-combatants have immunity from intentional killing. So some questions that can be raised here are questions like, well, what makes it morally permissible to kill combatants but not non-combatants?
Well, I mean, it's the intent. It's they've signed up for it for one.
They've agreed to it. And,
yeah.
They pose a threat of their own.
Yeah, that's it. They are the threat, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
So the next question is the principle one that is absolute, or are there times when you can actually override this principle that non-combatants can't be intentionally targeted?
Well, that's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, I suppose if it was the circumstance of, if you didn't do it, then there was a much greater evil. Could you have, well, like we had the discussions, problem of dirty hands.
Nuclear bomb is one, right? I mean, they eventually dropped the nuke simply because it would save time and therefore combatants' death.
Yeah, it would save like many more lives in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. And another question is it even possible to fight a war without intentionally targeting non-combatants?
Okay. Oh wait, I was gonna do.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. No, I was gonna do just one exception to the other one, or in the form of a question. A part of a war, as we're seeing now, is also sanctions.
Yeah.
A lot of people are making a big deal about not targeting the civilians of Russia with the sanctions. I say smack them the hell down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't think it's possible to put sanctions on a country without it actually affecting the civilians of that country.
Well, what they've done now, for as far as I know, is they've frozen European and U.S. assets and the other stuff like that from the oligarchs, right? So they can sell their vacation homes and that sort of stuff. So that does target only them. But I would say as well that, especially in this case, you see that they don't really work. Mostly in this case because Russia has prepared for sanctions like the past 2 years, at least, probably 8. What the thing is, I think that targeting the people of a country is going to lead to social upheaval, which is going to lead more to things like demonstrations, riots, etc., and eventually, possibly, the toppling of an unjust government. So I think that if you are fighting a just war, you can target the civilians of another country as long as it's only economically.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, we're going to come to an argument soon where it's okay to actually target civilians, like violently as well. You'll probably know which argument.
Just having a giggle at Lone Wolf's comment. He says, I was leaning towards pacifist ideologies until I took that last tech support phone call. Now I fully support global thermonuclear war, and I think it'd be moral.
Having worked on technical support, I can get behind that.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating. I think the three of us can agree on that one.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question is it even possible to fight a war without intentionally targeting some non-combatants?
It depends on how far we're going to stretch the definition of combatants, I think.
That's the next question, yeah. is there a point at which a non-combatant becomes a combatant? Like, what makes somebody a non-combatant, and what puts them into the combatant category?
Yeah, exactly. Our camp guards in Auschwitz, are they combatants or are they people who are doing their jobs, basically, right? Especially
Yeah.
if they aren't.
Okay, so those are some interesting questions. So the just war tradition speaks of intentionally targeting civilians. But what if they're not intentionally targeted? And there's a question here. If you work in a munitions factory helping the war effort, are you a combatant? Like Martin said, if you're a camp guard, are you a combatant or are you just doing your job? And in this case, you have the civilians contributing to the war effort, making the munitions that are being used to kill people and bomb people. Are they combatants?
Are they choosing to do this, or are they being forced into this line of work, or has their normal work closed down and the only way they can survive is doing
Is
this
working in
form
these
of work?
factories.
Suppose you don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what makes it tough. And you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know the case-by-case status of these people.
No, I believe this is an actual thought experiment in the book as well.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, the question also is in the book. I believe that you know that some are innocent and some are not innocent. I believe, and you don't know which percentage is innocent and which percentage is not innocent. You don't know that. You just know that there's some kind of a mixture of people being forced and people doing it voluntarily.
And how many lives would then be saved by, say, destroying,
by targeting them?
Yeah. It's a calculation. I think it's, again, you're back in the problem of dirty hands. I think that's
exactly what it is. It's an example of dirty hands. You're left with two moral choices. You can either let them continue to make things that kill innocent people, or you can bomb some innocent people to stop that.
Neither of those choices are particularly nice, but
or particularly moral.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'd say just don't go for the bombing, man. Don't go for it.
Well, one idea is the doctrine of double effect. And this is the idea that whenever we perform an action, there's usually two kinds of effects. There's the effects we intend and the effects that we can foresee but not intend to do. I mean, there is another category. It's that there are effects we can't foresee, but can happen. But in this case, we're thinking about the bombing of the munitions factory. So you intend to destroy the munitions factory to hinder the war effort, but you don't intend to kill the innocent people. That's just an unfortunate side effect. And one that you're very sorry for, and you feel some kind of moral reprehension. Does the doctrine of double effect kind of solve that issue? Are you only morally responsible for the effects that you intend?
No. You're responsible for the moral effects you cause. I mean, if I were to intend to give you a nice pat on the back and I end up kicking out your kidneys, I'm responsible for kicking out your kidneys, not for giving you a pat on the back. It's fucking yeah.
Well, there's one thing here that can be raised in that. Imagine you're a waitress working in a cafe, say, And the owner doesn't like the person that's ordered this cup of tea, so they put a bit of rat poison in the cup of tea. You've handed over the cup of tea, and they end up poisoned. You didn't intend to poison them, but you did poison them. So are you morally responsible for their poisoning?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'd say you're not, unless you take some form of weak consequentialism, which is one of the problems I have with consequentialism. Is the fact that you're just looking at the results. There's no way you could know that this would happen. It's like the
You
example.
fucking poisoned the drink, though.
Sorry?
You fucking poisoned the drink,
No, you
though.
didn't. No.
No, the waitress didn't poison the drink. She just handed it over.
You didn't know.
Oh, wait, wait. I got mixed up there. Sorry. Wait. What?
Okay, so the chef or whoever it is making the cups of teas doesn't like the person that's just ordered this cup of tea. And he gives it to the waitress, who then gives it to the customer. Her only intent was to hand over a nice, refreshing cup of tea, but she actually handed over a poison tea. Is she morally responsible for his poisoning?
No, she isn't. No, sorry. No.
Because she didn't intend to poison him. And she couldn't actually foresee it either.
No, but you see, she didn't foresee it. She didn't cause it. And I mean, the only thing that happens there is a transaction, of which she is actually also a third party. I think this is an analogy that simply doesn't really go.
That's the point. It isolates the idea that in this situation of the doctrine of double effect, there isn't this sort of buffer between what they couldn't foresee. So they still have some kind of intention to kill those people. It's not their main intention, but if they know those people are there and they foresee them being there and they foresee them being killed, there still seems to be some kind of intention there, doesn't there, to kill those people? It's just not their main intention.
Yeah, but the waitress doesn't foresee it, though.
That's it. That's the major difference. They actually foresee those innocent people being killed. So for me at least, it adds a kind of moral responsibility that the doctrine of double effect seems to be trying to escape. And I don't think it actually does escape that problem.
I agree with the message. I'm not sure that I really followed the analogies, but I agree with the message.
The waitress one is only to isolate the fact that if you don't intend it, that relieves you of moral responsibility, but you still have some kind of intention of killing those innocent people in the munitions factory.
Yeah.
It might not be your main intention, but you intend to kill them when you drop that bomb. So I don't see how the doctrine of double effect actually relieves them of that moral responsibility, because the intent is still there to kill them.
Yeah, I would put it in a different way. I would say that your intent is still to kill a number of people. And I would say that when your intent is to kill a number of people, that their individual attributes don't really merit any discrimination on part of the person doing the action, right?
Yeah, but the actual main intent is to just hinder the war effort rather than actually kill any of those innocents. So
if that would be the case, you'd bomb it by night or when
at night or something, yeah.
So then we wouldn't have any casualties, or very little.
So, yeah, the doctrine of double effect would argue that it's still morally permissible to do this, even though you foresee the innocents getting killed. It's not what you mainly intend to do. Your intent is something else, so therefore it's a foreseen side effect, but not one that you actually want to happen. But like I say, I don't think that actually kind of gets over the problem.
I think the doctrine of double effect is one of those very nice things that philosophers sometimes do that is kind of appealing at first sight, but quickly starts being a whole heap of problems when you analyze them too deeply.
Yeah. I mean, if you say the Nazis didn't intend to commit genocide, they intended to create a bunch of employment. That doesn't seem to excuse the genocide.
No, not at all.
So, are the jus ad bellum and jus in bello traditions absolute and binding, or are there times where the rules of war and rules of engagement can be suspended? Michael Walzer argues that there are actually times when it is permissible to suspend them. And you'll know this one, Martijn, after reading the book, and that's the idea of supreme emergency. So when you have a nation state or a political community that is in danger of being wiped out, like an actual imminent existential threat to that political community, and the collapse of that political community it creates a kind of a moral problem. So, say in the case of the Nazis, if the Nazis had have destroyed Britain, then they would have had Europe, and
I know a better one though.
Which one?
It is entirely fictional because the timelines don't match up. But suppose the Nazis had managed to conquer modern-day Israel and go, because that would mean like almost 100% genocide. That's the point.
Yeah. So, according to Walzer, in a situation like that, there is a right to kind of get rid of these just war traditions, because you must survive. Like, it wouldn't be the same for the Nazis when they were on their last legs. If they were about to be wiped out, they were committing great harms, like real moral horrors. So they didn't have the right to supreme emergency. But because Britain was trying to stop this moral horror, they have this right of supreme emergency.
I disagree, though. The only thing is that my own example is fucking me right now, because that would effectually mean the destroying of the Israel people. We shouldn't want that, of course. But I don't think that. I think it should still also always be proportional. Especially also taking into account foreseen effects. One of the things is, for instance, that in my Israel example, I know that Israel has a certain amount of nukes. I would say that whatever happens to you, to your country, or to your people, you are not allowed to throw a nuke. Never.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that because of the lack of proportion. But if we go to the example that Walzer uses, which is the bombing of Dresden, and this is the idea that in the case of supreme emergency that Britain was going through, that gave them permission, even though it was still morally impermissible, it made it permissible to actually target civilians. So constant bombing raids on Dresden and the bombings of munitions factories, it caused an impact that kind of turned the war around. It got rid of resources and it made the people tired of the war. And it had a major effect. And it stopped Britain, the political community, from, dying out, and allowed them to continue and therefore kind of help to rescue the prisoners in the camps.
Yeah, with all due respect, I still cannot approve carpet bombing a city. I simply can't, man. I know what it cost, what it prevented, and all of that, but no, man. And especially, that's also something Walter describes in his book, which I was absolutely horrified by. That has to also be mentioned. After the carpet bombings of Dresden, they went by bomb shelters and stuff, opened them, and just threw in grenades. And
threw in grenades, yeah.
Sorry, no, that sort of fucking shit. That's terrorism, and it's horrible. No other word.
That's why Brian Orend called that part of Walter's thesis the darkest part. And he actually kind of disagreed with it. So I kind of got ahead of myself with the last slide. So in the case of the UK, you know, its collapse would have led to immeasurable evil, that of the genocide of the Jewish people. So according to Walter, it seems that there was a necessity involved in dropping those just war traditions and those rules of war and rules of engagement.
Yeah.
So C.A.J. Cody criticizes Walter here. He argues that it unfairly favors nation states and countries because, according to him, only a nation state is allowed to drop these rules of combat and rules of engagement and use terror tactics on their enemy. Now, if we think about something like the Jewish resistance in World War II in Nazi Germany, they were using terror tactics against the Nazis and against, you know, German soldiers. They didn't, and they also had their citizenship taken away from them. So they had no nation state. They didn't have a country that they belonged to. So according to Walter, it would be wrong for them to commit these acts to stop themselves from, you know, imminent destruction, imminent genocide. But there seems to be something kind of wrong there, because it doesn't seem like the fact that they're not a nation state means that they are not allowed to defend themselves using terror tactics.
Yeah. The whole thing is, yeah, I agree with Cody. And I just don't really agree with your example. The resistance movements in World War II, that they mostly target Nazi headquarters and those kinds of things. They didn't target people, right?
Not in the Warsaw ghettos and places like that. They actually targeted the German soldiers. They didn't target people, but they used terror tactics against the soldiers and those that were coming in.
No. They target soldiers all the time. But that's the point. They targeted combatants, right? So it's not really terrorism. It's guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, but they had no nation state that would allow them to actually declare a just war against these people because they had their citizenship removed. So they are just terrorists according to Walter's own description of terrorists.
Yeah, but Walter's wrong there.
Yeah, but they use terror tactics. They use bombings. You know, they weren't a legitimate army. So it seems that there should be no
implications, though. I mean,
but yeah, it seems that there should be no kind of moral difference between the fact that they had no nation state and the nation state, between them being allowed to use terror to stop what was happening to them.
I know exactly. Yeah, that's
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Cody argues. Why is it only nation states that are allowed to be given this supreme emergency license, but not other groups. If you think about Palestine, I mean, they don't have the kind of government that would fulfill these needs.
They don't
But they
government at all, right? I mean, they don't really have a government at all, right? I mean, I
no,
know
exactly.
nominally it's Hamas, but I don't know.
Yeah, so
Much.
I mean, and they're still under an existential threat, even though they're a threat to another nation. Obviously, they're still under an existential threat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Cody argues that this unfairly favors nation states, and it's not a good enough argument to justify this kind of thing only for one particular group, although he can see that there could be times when it might be necessary for people to drop the rules of engagement, like, in situations like that, where all they're left with is these actions. And they're faced by a far superior force with far superior weapons.
One of yeah, okay. So that's actually one of the arguments I've been making for a very long time. A lot of people seem very upset with terrorists, but in many cases, these are people that are in the less than developed countries who are being targeted by more than advanced warfare machines and thus don't have any chance of striking back any significant kind of hit against people who are bombing them. So what do you do to hit someone? You go below the belt, right? You go after their fucking citizens. That's what you do. So I think people need that perspective when they're looking at terrorism. It's oftentimes it's just the warfare of the helpless.
It's a far more complicated situation than many people give it credit for. Like you said, it's the war of the helpless and the hopeless.
Yeah.
And that sort of relates back to Jeff's thing earlier. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And in cases like this, that is the case.
Sean says that he'd argue that Germany broke the rules of engagement in reference to the Holocaust, and therefore they were open to reprisal by the Jewish body at large.
I would agree, but Walter wouldn't. Because they don't have that's one of the reasons kind of why they were given Israel, so that they would have all these things that they could fulfill. They could fulfill the war. If this ever happened to them again, they were given a country to be safe in, that kind of thing. But I would agree that their aggression meant that they were, more than deserving of some kind of retaliation from the Jewish community at large.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what also is the saving grace of the way they've been prosecuted after the war, because had their actions not been unprecedented, I objected to the fact that they had been how do you say judged after the fact, basically.
Yeah. And again, this is another argument against something like moral realism, in that if war is just hell and we can't speak about it in terms of moral kind of questions and just questions of justice, then nothing that the Nazis actually did was particularly wrong during the war. Whereas they committed many things that we would consider to be crimes against humanity.
In the most literal sense.
In the most literal sense, yeah. Okay, so another thing that Cody would argue is the idea of supreme emergency is a case of dirty hands. You have intentionally targeting non-combatants and rejecting the rules of combat to save your own nation from destruction. You're doing the wrong thing in order to do the right thing. You're left with choices where the worst is happening, whichever you decide. But there are other examples of situations of supreme emergency that might not be strictly limited to war. Now, if you think of something like the ticking time bomb scenario, we've covered this before in our Dirty Hand stream. There is still a grave moral injustice that's going to happen if you allow that bomb to go off. It might not be an existential threat to your political community at large or your nation state, but there is still an existential threat to quite a lot of people there. And it seems to be that if it's okay to drop the rules of engagement in that sort of situation, is it okay to drop human rights in that situation? Like, would it become okay to torture a terrorist to get that information to stop the time bomb, to stop the bomb from going off?
Never. No. Also, it is factually just not really a realistic scenario. But yeah.
Well, some of the arguments are that, torture just isn't effective. You're not going to get the answers probably. And let's say you decide that it's okay to torture. Can we then also say something like that? Because he could be considered a combatant. Yeah. So if we say it's okay to target non-combatants in a case of a supreme emergency like that, would it then be okay to bring in that guy's 4-year-old daughter and torture her in front of him? Because she's a non-combatant. And he's probably more likely to give up the information to stop his daughter from being attacked.
Someone bought the CIA handbook on Amazon last week.
But do you see what I mean? It seems to be that if we allow these kind of conditions to go on in this supreme emergency, it can lead to all kinds of morally reprehensible actions that are justified simply based on the fact that, we must protect people.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, we did do a whole stream on this, if anybody wants to go watch it, called Dirty Hands.
Yeah, this the reason I haven't spoke up on this one. Everybody's heard my answer on this one at least a couple of times. But as Dave mentions, there's the stream called The Problem of Dirty Hands. We also brought it up in a different stream as well. I'm not sure if it was the moral particularism and value pluralism stream.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I will quickly grab a link to the Dirty Hand stream and put it in the chat if anyone wants to save it for later, whilst Dave continues.
Okay, so there's another objection here as well, and it comes in the form of Kantianism. One argument that Kant makes is that we should never use people as a means to an end. And by targeting civilians in order to make the war effort stop, not only are we killing these innocent people, but we are using them as a means to end the war.
Yeah, in a practical sense, that sounds attractive, but yeah, I'm not sure that this is such a great argument. Actually,
it would depend on whether you're a deontologist or a Kantian. If you are those things, then these objections would mean that you can't actually stick to your moral system and do these other actions.
Yeah, so that's probably where my problem is. I think I'm fairly deontological when it comes to human rights, but that's mostly because it's a legislative issue, which means precedent applies, which is also always a bitch. So I always make that connection, right? So no, I'm gonna go for no.
Okay.
Human rights, no.
And one other argument for these kind of things comes in the form of consequentialism, well, we might be causing this great amount of suffering. The amount of suffering we'd be stopping in the long run seems to mean that it is the right action to actually bomb civilians. It might not be good in some sense, but we are trading the lives off. We are, this amount of suffering by the enemy side is worth the pleasure and kind of happiness and the joy in the long run for those that are being attacked. And you think of, the saving of the lives of the genocide and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's a more sophisticated argument. I'll give it that.
Yeah.
But it's still a hard pass on my behalf. Yeah, let's not do it.
Okay, and that's basically the end of the introduction to just war theory. Those are what's involved. Those are some of the ideas and some of the arguments for and against. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Dave, thanks.
Hopefully you found it interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot in there to think about. Definitely see potential for us to, definitely see fucking hell. Sorry, the tramadol's really fucking up my brain right now. Definitely see potential for us to come on and discuss this sort of stuff in future as well, and take it further. Especially with what may well be happening in the world, we might actually have some actual examples to discuss. I hope we don't. I hope it's something that fizzles out and it's not going to be a problem. But I think, that's probably quite a naive hope. Oh, have we lost you, Dave?
Sorry. No, I'm just responding to somebody in the chat. Sorry.
So, folks in the chat, I know I've been trying to keep up as we've gone along, but are there any particular questions that you have? And also, Martijn, is there anything you'd like to ask Dave?
I'd like to hear his opinion on all of the stuff he's just presented. I mean, he's given us a few opinions along the way, but I think a lot of things have gone unanswered. And, well, floor to you, Dave. I want to hear it.
I tend to lean towards the idea that war can be discussed in terms of justice and morality, and I think it's absolutely essential to it. Because if morality and justice doesn't apply to war and the soldiers in war, then it seems to be that there can be no such thing as war crimes. Whatever happens in war is what happens in war. And I think it's just better for us to think of war in moral terms, in terms of justice. I think pacifism doesn't work because it just allows for tyranny. And tyranny is something to be fought and objected and stopped. And to open your own door to it seems to be a bit of a foolish move.
That seems great. Yeah.
So Luke has a question. He says, how can we consolidate these ideas with nuclear weapons, like the current nuclear weaponry that we have?
Nuclear weapons are automatically unjust because they're, like Martijn said earlier, they're not proportional. And there is no way to stop them targeting non-combatants or innocent people.
But that is only when they are used. And
they make a good deterrent.
Weapons. The way nuclear weapons are used without actually being used, right now, that's actually, I'd say a pretty good thing.
Yeah, they do. They make for a good deterrent because nobody really wants to start an all-out thermonuclear global war.
Yeah.
But as we can also see, they don't necessarily work as a deterrent to war. They just work as a deterrent to nuclear war.
Yeah, and but it is exactly the reason why I am here with you tonight and not cowering beneath my bed. Is simply the nuclear weapons that Germany has, that France has, and that you guys have.
And America and Russia and everyone else. I mean, we don't really have to worry about Korea because they can barely get any missiles past the border.
Regrettably, it is also the reason why we sadly are in the process of literally sacrificing Ukraine. It has to be said. We're literally sacrificing those people, and that is really sad.
It's sad, yeah. That's it. It's not a deterrent to all war. And in some cases, it allows for wars that could be fought and stopped to actually go ahead with no actual intervention.
Yeah.
Because you're worried about, let's face it, Putin's a bit crazy. I have no doubts that Putin would be one of the first to fire because he doesn't really give a shit.
I have a theory about that. I'm thinking if I compare a photo of him from right now with a photo of him 2 years ago, I'm going to say this man is having some kind of a heart problem. He's 60 years old, and I'm thinking he's not that relevant lately. So he's going to make himself relevant before he dies.
He's posturing, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking this is literally a fucking heritage thing, a legacy thing.
That's quite possible, yeah. I mean,
very interesting.
I would argue that the war in Ukraine is completely unjust, according to just war theory.
I'd say that too. Yeah.
Yeah, there seems to be no good reason for them to invade the Ukraine. They're not stopping anything. They're actually committing something. So I don't think it's a just war, and I can see from videos that have come out today that they're actually targeting civilians and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm not about to make excuses for them, but from their perspective, from what I understand, I mean, it is worth a mention, right? From the perspective of Putin, from what I understand, he is convinced that the Ukraine is going to join NATO at some point.
Yeah.
And the fact that we are sacrificing NATO at this point is actually the only way to appease him, is what I'm thinking. So it is harsh, but that's fucking international politics these days, man. I mean, it's everybody believes in fucking geopolitics. What geopolitics? Let me tell you, people, it's a dumb ass fucking idea. All right, sorry. And
it's so good.
So what do you make of Sean's war theory? He says, has it gone? There it is. He says, my war theory is this. 1, what is the objective? 2, is it feasible to achieve? If you can't answer the second question, all you're doing is holding action, not a solution.
I would agree with that. And those are some of the things that are included in the just war tradition. One I didn't mention that is sort of being discussed now is there are extra things being added onto the just war tradition. I know it goes back a long way, but it's also still being worked on and being argued because it's part of the Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention. And that's they're adding this category of jus post bellum. And that's the idea of justice after war. So you have to have this kind of exit strategy that's going to leave the country stable. You need to kind of help repair the damage and make sure that the people are okay, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
It's what America kind of tried in Afghanistan and Iraq, but failed miserably, like most
yeah,
things that they do.
that's a bit of the point. I think it's fairly, in a sense, it reminds me of, I'm not sure who it was. There was one of these philosophers, a Brit, it was just after the Enlightenment, I believe, who said like it is the duty of the West to civilize the people of India. I believe it was John Locke or Edward.
No, he's way before then.
I don't know. I don't know who it was, but philosophy tube. They referenced him about it once.
I know
Anyway,
Churchill also said that.
it is
Or
very
something similar to
reminiscent
that.
anyway of the fucking colonial ideal of we are going to civilize these people, and that doesn't sit right with me, really.
Yeah, that wouldn't fit the Jus Post Bellum though, because the idea is it isn't of an intent of justice; it's an intent of, conquest. Like Sean said, it's sort of all you're doing is a holding action. You're conquering the country and transforming it into your puppet state.
Yeah. What are postbellum things going to say? I mean, if one of those things are going to be like democracy, I think that could possibly be asking too much.
Yeah, I think you sort of have to take into account the actual culture and what they're used to. And that's one of the problems with something like Afghanistan, is that they're used to this sort of Islamic rule. So if you go in and try and eradicate Islam from that country, you're never going to succeed, because it not only is it not what they're used to, it's not what they believe in.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm worried that those postbellum rules are going to are going to well, subject people to those kinds of things that they're not used to. That they're going to be too Western centric, and therefore they have a very colonial aftertaste. I'm worried about
This is some of the stuff that they're still trying to work out.
Well, all the best student then.
Yeah. It's relatively recent considering the age of, the just war tradition, because that goes back to 300 AD
That's
or BCE. No, what is it now? CE.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, 300 CE or thereabouts.
No, yeah. Then, well, let's just hope they'll make good decisions, right? That's it.
Yeah.
There aren't any other questions in the chat at the moment. If there is any more, get them in quickly. Guys, did you have anything that you wanted to add tonight? Either about just war theory or actually current events?
Well, I'd say that whilst I think that it is important for us to discuss war in moral terms, and that I think it is possible to do that, I do think that it is, in most cases, a very costly endeavor to get into war, and I think that we are, as humans, incapable of calculating value and also cost. Which means I would say that it is actually never really worth it to engage in war, though it may seem like it is. I think that in some times, some cases where we would say that it is self-defense and therefore justified, it may actually not be.
Interesting.
because the cost of the war itself is too great. Basically.
Right, yeah.
And I think it's going to be hard to deal with that going forward and looking backward, actually.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think just war theory stuff works only if everybody is sort of agreeing to it and being involved in it.
Yeah.
It's sort of like pacifism. I mean, if you think, going back to Martin's example of guerrilla warfare, none of those were involved in just war theory. So if you're tying the hands of the soldiers to fight back with only fighting in these moral terms, then you are kind of causing them harm, like the moral realist would argue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes a lot of sense. Question from Lone Wolf says, if it's okay to discuss war in moral terms, does that mean it's okay to discuss rape in moral terms? Yes, why wouldn't you discuss rape in moral terms?
Yeah, I mean, we do.
Yeah.
The thing with what you're basically doing when you're agreeing to discuss war in moral terms is telling people like, do you want to stand in blood with me and tell me where the fucking stream is coming from? That's basically what you're asking, right? I mean, who's the person who's wrong here? Who's spilling the most unnecessary blood? That's basically what you're asking. So yeah, I mean, who's doing the most unnecessary rape? I think is a very logical question, and I think the answer is in many cases the one doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
He says the reason he asks it that way is because some people would compare war to rape in a very real way. I mean, I suppose one key comparison is the violence and the consent.
The violation of, yeah.
So that there are parallels that can be drawn there. And yeah. I wouldn't say they're exactly the same thing. Obviously, there's key differences, but I can understand why people might compare the two. But yeah, I think you can discuss both with moral language, and it's perfectly valid to do so.
I'm looking at the chat for a minute, and I'm seeing the next one. We say things like a just war. Can we say a thing like a just rape?
No, because it's always unjust to rape. Yeah.
But I'm willing to compare if he is. I mean, basically what you're describing with a rape. No, wait a second. I'm not gonna do this because I'm gonna get a lot of hate. Fuck it. No, I'm not gonna do this because this. Also, I just realized that I was going to make a classical error. As in, I was going to compare raping someone with taking something from someone, and that is not an accurate comparison. So I'm going to not make.
Yeah, no, not a good comparison.
No, not at all. But well, you realised the path you were on there, and you stopped yourself. So well done.
Yeah, it was just in time. But that's how far the fucking bias goes. I have to think about it, and I have been drinking.
Shall I end my screen share?
You can do. I've put us in the made it bigger anyway, so it's
okay.
fine either way. Yeah.
There we go.
So Sean brings up a point saying that sadly, I think a lot more of recent wars are built on money and resources, no actual benefit to humanity, and I'd have to agree with you there. I think in general we see that sort of thing from war. It is often fighting over resources and things like that. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you there.
I'm not really. I'm going to say that the only real benefit from war to humanity is technological development, and I don't see why technology won't be extra developing because of this war or the wars we have ongoing in other places, which we're helping the US with. Probably worth checking for what your government's doing, by the way. But anyway, yeah, I found out my government's bombing Yemeni people, and I'm not really pleased about that. Anyway, yeah. So that's my message. Over and out. Well, not out, but over.
um, right. Okay. So there aren't any more comments. Did you have anything last thing that you wanted to say, Dave?
No, just that if anybody found any particular elements of this interesting and wanted it expanded on, I'd be more than happy to do so, go into more detail about any of the different things, because it's quite a big subject, and there's no way you're going to fit everything and all the details into one stream, because generally you study this for about a month during an undergrad.
Yeah, and you know, we often say this with any of our streams. They already go on for sometimes 2-3 hours, and we cover as much as we can, but a lot of the time we're only scratching the surface, and we allow you folks to come to us and ask anything, and if you have a particular subtopic you want us to focus on in the future, we'll gladly do that, and if not, we're going to jump onto the next topic that interests us as well. So just a reminder, Tuesdays at the moment, Dave's putting up a book, Just and Unjust Wars.
Yeah, also, if you want to learn more about it, that's probably the best book. And then Ethics of Killing a War by Jeff McNabb.
And just a reminder, on Tuesdays, we are currently going through our reviews of the 10 questions for theists and 10 questions for atheists. We're doing one a week. And if I can remember correctly, which I can't, the one that just went, we just did a theist one, didn't we? So it should be an atheist one that we're doing next week. And I think it's... Let's have a look. Sorry, I'm just loading it up. I should have got this ready. So
Best arguments for?
Yeah, what are the most what arguments or other evidence do you find most convincing, interesting, or thought-provoking for the existence of a deity? So there's quite a few atheists on there. There's TMM, T-Jump, Bearded Heretic, Necessary Being, Emerson Green, Godless Granny, and Godless Scummer. All joining, all being reviewed for their answers, and that's next Tuesday at 9 p.m. GMT. We also, next Thursday, we're going to be streaming at a very different time for us. Our intent is to be doing an early stream, and we'll put it up, but it's probably going to be about 4 p.m. GMT, and we won't be doing our usual evening stream, but I'll put the details for that on YouTube once it's been nailed down. So that's it from me. And you've been watching the SciPhi show. We've been talking about just war theory and the philosophy of war. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And I'm Martijn.
Have yourselves a good one all. Thank you for watching.
Good night all. Oh, bloody hell. I thought Martijn would hang around.